Everybody ready?
We are ready.
All right, it is 1:01. I'm calling the April 17th, 2023 meeting of the Albemarle County Architectural Review Board to order. Chris, if you could please call the roll.
Sure. Mr. Vanderwerf? Here. Mr. Stoner?
Here.
Mr. Matsuno? Here. Mr. Hancock?
Here.
And Mr. Hennessy is absent.
Thank you. Announcements. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The public may access and participate in the meeting electronically. Instructions for doing so are posted on the Albemarle County website at the Albemarle County calendar. The public has real-time audio-visual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over telephone, both as provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. This meeting is a public record and subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. More announcements. All speakers, when it is your turn to speak, please first state your name for the record. Applicants who are making presentations, note that your presentation is limited to a total of 15 minutes, which you can divide among your team members. Staff will let us know when the 15 minutes are up.
I'm sorry, can we pause for a second? Just to make sure that the recording is on? Our IT staff can help us tell us. It was rolling before we began.
Okay.
Thank you.
If applicants in the meeting room have team members attending virtually who will need to present, please make that known when you come to the podium. Everyone who is participating virtually, please mute your microphone until it is your turn to speak. Disclosures, do any ARB members have anything to disclose?
No, you're not.
You're not either? Are there any members of the public that want to make a comment about a project that is not on the agenda for review? Chris, is that hello?
Hello, Neil Williamson with the Free Enterprise Forum. Earlier today, I received a phone call from a business owner in an entrance corridor. And this person told me that they had had a visit from someone from the county that was enforcing sign ordinances in the entrance corridor. Now, I've never heard of such a county employee. And I believe this person has visited this particular enterprise at least twice. It's been my understanding that ARB decisions are zoning decisions, and zoning decisions generally are adjudicated on a complaint basis. And this person suggested that they were traveling the entrance corridors looking for violations. This would be a radical new shift that I have trouble believing happened. And I had no idea where to go other than, well, the ARB makes the decisions. These were really sign ordinance questions, but nonetheless, you were meeting today and you drew the short straw. So I was hoping that you might ask questions of staff on the record that we do or do not have folks cruising the entrance corridors looking for sign violations or any other violations, just to clear the air about the issue. As always, thank you for your service.
Thank you. I am not aware of this position within the county. Margaret?
Yeah, we don't
Badcom.
have any staff that are out cruising the corridors, so to speak. We'd need a little more information to be able to follow up on that.
Just, I would think the zoning, there's some enforcement on the zoning side, but not necessarily specific to.
Everything is complaint driven. There are a few sign issues out there that are open and have code compliance officers working on them based on complaints that have come in the past, but we don't send people out just to drive up and down the corridors and look for violations.
Okay, thank you.
So can I ask a follow-up question to that? If a county employee happens to be driving down 29 and they see something that looks like a violation, is it within their authority to report that, or does it have to be a complaint from a third party?
That's a good question. I don't know where each of those code compliance officers, draws the line there. I would imagine if they're out and they see something and it's a violation, they might look into it. Again, I think it would be most helpful to get more information on this particular incident, and then we'd have a better idea of what's going on.
Any other questions? Thanks, Margaret. On to the consent agenda. There are no consent agenda items today. Regular review items. There's one regular review item today. It is ARB 2023-26, Regent School of Charlottesville. Margaret, you ready for the presentation?
Yes, I'm gonna try and share my screen. We were having a little bit of issues earlier. Looks like we're good. Okay. This is a review of an amendment to an approved site plan for the Regents School of Charlottesville. The issues identified in the staff report were really very few, but I wanted to spend a minute or two on the history of the project to explain how we got where we are today. The site is located on the north side of the I-64 entrance corridor and north and west of the on-ramp to the interstate from the bypass. The property is highlighted in yellow on this slide, and it's in the heavier black line on this plan. I've included this particular image because it shows the relationship of the parcels to the interstate fairly well. The interstate is really on the left side of the image in this slide. You may recall that the ARB reviewed the initial site plan, and that was in March of 2020. And the ARB submittal that was made under the May 4th, 2020 deadline was reviewed by staff. It was not forwarded to the ARB for review based on the information in the submittal that suggested that the buildings wouldn't be visible from the entrance corridor street. The submittal described the project as a campus in the woods with classroom buildings connected by decks and trees integral to the design scheme, all to ensure consistency with forested character of the entrance corridors in the area. We approved that plan. We issued a certificate of appropriateness in July of 2020 based on that expected low level of visibility. And the final site plan for the project was approved in April of 2022. The major amendment was first submitted in July of 2022, and our review of that first submittal focused on the lighting of the sports field. We're still working under the assumption that the buildings weren't going to be visible from the entrance corridor street, but the field lighting could have an impact, and there were conditions of the special use permit related to the sports lighting that needed to be complied with. But then in February of this year, we noticed after some clearing and grading had been completed, and with the leaves off the trees there at the end of the winter season, the development was much more visible than we had expected it to be. Also, discussions with the engineering firm at that time revealed that the school was considering a different color for the buildings, no longer that sort of weathered wood color, but they were thinking of using white instead. So we're bringing this proposal to you today because that white color would make the buildings even more noticeable in the landscape, and just that that change in the degree of visibility, we're bringing it to the ARB for review. These photos show the difference between the winter and summer views, but keep in mind regarding, in particular, that top photo, that a snapshot taken on a camera in a moving vehicle isn't exactly as seeing the site in person as you're there on the corridor. As you pass by with the leaves off the trees, there has been a clear view into the site. That photo was taken a few weeks ago. Now there's even more leaves on the tree. So as you get more and more leaves on the tree, obviously the view is much less and less. Our review of the site plan resulted in only a few minor comments on lighting and landscaping. We had identified no issues with the building designs themselves. They're generally simple and traditional forms and features consistent with the historic architecture of the county. Most of the buildings are connected by decks and supported by wooden piers, and you can see that in the portion of the site section in the lower left-hand corner of the slide. So the primary issue is really the color of the buildings and the resulting impact on the view from the corridor. Physical samples of the materials are on a board on the stage behind you. Our recommendation on the color is that the white be revised to a muted earth tone to coordinate better with the wooded character of the corridor and to maintain a consistent appearance along the corridor. And our recommendation on the overall proposal is for approval with the conditions listed in the staff report. And I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Margaret. We'll ask ARB members if they have questions for staff. Tara,
No, I don't have any questions.
Frank,
I don't have any questions.
Dade.
Sure. Yeah, Margaret, thank you for that report. Would you mind going back to the site plan and just, could you clarify for me which building faces we saw in that photo that you shared? Is it the ones at the left?
Yes. The ones on sort of the left half near the sports field, that's the current phase of development. It's actually the major amendment covers everything because the
Okay.
ones on the right side had shifted a bit, but the newer ones, the ones you looked at are on the left side.
Okay. And can you remind me, has there been any more clearing than was originally anticipated, or alternatively, are there significant plantings in the site plan that are still yet to be installed?
There is there has been some change in the wooded area to remain, or the line of the tree line to remain. There's a little bit less, particularly I think at the north end of the development. And there were a few, maybe 2 or 3 small areas of trees closer to the buildings that were shown on earlier plans that are no longer shown. I think there was more grading that was needed to accommodate some of the water lines, and that's why some of that has changed.
Okay, thank you. And with the amendment, are those trees or earlier extents no longer valid? Or is there any additional planting that can reasonably be required or expected under the initial certificate of appropriateness?
We struggled with whether or not to recommend adding some trees back in, just given the amount of trees that are still out there. I think if there were some trees added closer to the buildings, that might offset some of the other, some of the extra visibility, so to speak, that we're seeing. But there's also a lot of, there's a lot of steep slopes there. And so it's hard to know how much impact some of those trees would have or how long it would take for there to be
For them
impact.
to- yeah, okay.
I will add that there is when you're on the interstate, it does feel like a lot of this screening is from what's in the right of way.
Yeah, thank you. I drove by it before this came up and had noticed that it stood out more than I had anticipated it doing so. And similar, not as much so as the development east of the Ravenna, but still more than I expected. Thank you.
Thanks, Dade. I don't have any questions. Margaret, thank you. Is the applicant here and ready to make a presentation?
Thank you. My name is Mark Kestner, architect for the project. So we got involved subsequently to a Texas architect that proposed the original sort of master plan and scheme and the cabin in the woods theme. So we're from Charlottesville. We're not from Texas. And so we ride around town and look at white buildings all the time on the hillside, and we think that's very appropriate. But to answer a couple of questions that have come up, there have been more trees cut down than originally anticipated. And I think that's more of a problem on our end than it is for you guys, because now we can see the interstate from our campus, and that's a real problem. We don't want to see the interstate. This is a really special school. It's a classical Christian school, and it has a real pure environment, and we want the buildings to feel really pure. It's very organic. There are 9 lower campus, sort of elementary school type buildings, and they're cottages. They're 600 to 12, 1,800, sort of at the largest scale. The dining hall is a little larger, the admin building is a little larger, but the classroom buildings are meant to be very intimate and small. The upper school is 6 buildings, so we've got 15 kind of small organically connected buildings by a deck system. The gym is down the road, locker rooms are down the road, so all that's going to come back. But the first couple of phases that we're working on, including the field, are very small buildings. So I think just in terms of our color selection, we did choose white because it's very timeless, it's simple, it represents the pure notion that we're after with the school. The roof material is a darker charcoal gray. The standing seam that's not asphalt shingle is a very dark charcoal gray. All of the bases are dark charcoal gray, but the actual siding, the board and batten siding, like you would see anywhere in Virginia, is white. And we think that's consistent with the area. So we understand that we're more visible now. We clearly get that, and I've ridden by the project many times from all sides. And if you, during the summer, winter months, you can clearly see the project. And we're in, I guess we're in phase 2, right? But phase 3 is coming, so we'll have 15 buildings out there. I'll pass around a couple of images. We don't have a formal video presentation, so to speak, but I do want you to see kind of the feel.
Oh, sure. Thank you very much.
Here's a few samples that indicate the
Got that colors for it. Okay, great. Thank you.
pre-existing scheme. I don't know.
So just to clarify the colors, is this
Black's
the
the window
the window? Okay, and the darker gray is the
base,
base and the medium is the,
white is the siding. What's the medium? Yes, so the dark gray is the base, dark gray is the standing seam, and the white's the
Ah,
color that we're
okay.
really talking
Okay,
about
great.
today.
thank you.
And I have an actual, pass the, actual sample. It is a white. We don't have a planting plan yet, but we will. And to mitigate that experience from the campus, in terms of hiding or protecting us from the harshness of that truck and automobile corridor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess maybe before you sit down, are there any questions for the applicant? We'll start with Dade.
No, I don't think so.
You're right, Tara. I was just looking at you to go down the line, but that's not the order. Let me ask Frank.
I guess if you could expand a little bit on the reasoning behind the color change, other than, and I don't recall the previous color.
I think in discussions over time, over the 5 years that the project has been developing, the consensus is that the white is the pure, simple, timeless color that most represents the mission of the school.
More questions, Frank?
No.
Tara?
Could we go back to the elevations again, actually? I might have been confused about something. I'd like to clarify.
Is that what you want? Oh, that what you're looking for?
Yeah, uh-huh. I just saw in the diagram that there were sort of piers shown in the little tiny inset site section earlier.
Correct.
Is that representing what we saw in those perspective photos?
Those two images don't show the piers, but you won't see the piers at the end of construction because there's a skirt that is comprised of horizontal slat boards that'll be painted the dark gray to match the other foundations that are not pier foundations.
Got it. Okay. All right. I was just curious about the apparent scale
Sure.
from the corridor. And so you're saying that sort of this one-story volume or appearing to be a one-story white volume is the thing that is visible from the corridor.
That's correct. And the
Yeah.
bases or the foundations, if you will be a darker,
Okay.
the dark gray.
Great. Thank you for clarifying.
Thanks, Tara. Just one question. There were some trees shown, like individual trees shown on the plan. Are those existing to remain? Or are there any proposed trees between the buildings and the buffer?
So if they are within the limits of disturbance, they will not stay. But if they're in the area to stay, they'll stay. We have not developed a new plan for new plantings to help with what we're discussing today.
Okay, so those are existing to remain.
Yes.
Shown now.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned a landscape plan is in development, like focused on your screening, so you don't have to see the interstate.
Yeah, I
Is that
think we,
correct?
I think we want to help each other. I think we want to plant to help our experience from the school to not see the interstate as much. And to help the question of whether or not you can see the campus. I mean, sure, in my opinion, it's a beautiful campus, so I'd want you to see it from the interstate. But if the conversation is moving forward, whether or not you'll be able to see it, I don't know the 100% answer to that, but we're going to try to improve that screening with
Okay.
Justin and Shemp Engineering.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions. Chris, are there members of the public that would like to comment?
No, we don't, no
No.
members of the public who wish to comment.
Okay. Now we'll go into discussion. Frank, you're first this time. You're not happy about that?
No, I'm fine. I would say, given the scale, I don't have any issue with the color. I think if they were 3-story structures with 3 stories of white, I'd probably feel differently. But I think given the limited visibility, I mean, we're talking about 4 months a year in which there's some visibility. And the fact that it sounds like plan some additional screening. I don't have a problem with it.
Thank you. Tara?
Yeah, I'm pretty much of the same mind with Frank. I think given the scale, I'm not especially concerned with the color white. I think the only thing is if some sort of planting plan can be documented to show what the intention is as the project moves forward, perhaps with the involvement of staff, that I think that would be pretty adequate for me.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, I agree with Taro and Frank. I think provided that there is a landscape plan submitted that provides some additional screening, both to the applicant's benefit and to the benefit of mitigating the visual impact of the development. I think I would be comfortable with the white color, given the scale.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with my fellow board members. I think it's such an interesting kind of collection of buildings. And as mentioned, it's pretty low profile and doesn't, given the distance and the height of the buildings, I don't think it'll have a huge impact on the corridor. And we might end up not being able to see this, because of the applicant's desire to not see the interstate, but I personally think, glimpses of it would be kind of nice, because you'd be curious as to what it is with that collection of buildings kind of sited that way. Whereas when you see a, 4-story apartment building, it's pretty obvious, but yeah, I agree. I think we struggle with the white on the big, expanse of an apartment building, whereas here, I think scale wise, it's okay. Do we want to review motion and staff comments?
So it sounds like you want to change number 1.
Provide a revised landscape, or provide a planting plan.
Yes. Yeah, I think we need, yeah. Like that, should we just add a new comment at the end, or?
Oh, I've drafted, provide a revised landscape plan with additional plans to screen the buildings from the entrance corridor street, but maybe you want to tweak that?
It's beautifully written, Margaret.
Uh, Thank you. Do you want to clarify or qualify it in any way, quantify?
Do you have any, I don't have any particular opinion, but I have a thought on number 5, replacing the Inkberry Holly. Consider.
What's your comment on that?
Just, it's there and I don't have an opinion on it, but I don't know if anyone else does.
I do. It's, I think it's a native Virginia shrub. It might not be native to the Piedmont. It's native to the coastal plain region, but I think landscape architects struggle with an evergreen shrub that is somewhat native, and this is, I think, a Virginia native. So all that to say, I'm okay with the Inkberry holly. It's used a fair amount, and it's an evergreen shrub, and it does grow here. And it's not invasive. I can keep going.
Would
So-
you consider amending it, or would you just like to keep it consider?
I mean, it's a consideration. I don't think it is
Not a requirement.
binding exactly, but
I'll just give you a little background on that. We are in the process of updating our recommended plant list to eliminate invasive species, and there are sources that include that on invasive lists. So we haven't officially changed the list yet. That's why we're saying consider. But maybe we can have a more in-depth conversation about whether or not it's invasive.
yeah, if it's invasive, I'm in trouble. I've spec'd it a lot.
We see it all
I'm
the
a
time.
part of the problem, Margaret.
We'll talk.
I think we can keep it at the level of consider, given the controversy.
Yeah. Sorry, you should have never brought it up. Thank you. Is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the application with the conditions listed in the staff report amended as follows: to provide a revised landscape plan with additional plans to screen the buildings from the entrance corridor, to revise the parking lot pole lights, to make the light fixture cut sheets visibly fully legible, revise the lighting plan, and consider replacing the Inkberry holly.
Do we have a second?
One second.
Call the vote.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Matsuno,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
and Mr. Henningsen is absent.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, we've got your samples.
Yeah.
Thank you. There is one work session today on the entrance corridor design guidelines addenda. Mariah, are you ready? Presentation.
Oh, that's my second. So sorry. Viewing another plan. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for your continued work and review of this project. Today we'll be reviewing the draft entrance corridor addenda for the full extent of Interstate 64. The last time you saw this, we had only surveyed the extent west of exit 120. Now that the eastern portion has been surveyed, that information has been integrated into the text and precedent imagery. As you may remember, this corridor does not have segments. The experience is fairly consistent with some distinct areas along the way. What we had noted before were included expansive views provided to travelers coming off of Afton Mountain. We've similarly noted the view of the water and mountains from the bridge that goes over the Rivanna River between interstate exits 124 and 121. As seen in the lower middle image. The additional precedent images are on the bottom row. The images on this sheet in general are ordered from going from the western end of the western terminus of 64 within Albemarle County to the eastern terminus of 64 within Albemarle County. Overall, the predominant experience along the corridor is that of landscapes and views. This is the only spread we have for you today. I can flip between the different pages. Altogether, the zoning is fairly rural, except for the areas where it passes through development areas. And this is the sheet spread together.
Thanks, Mariah. Very timely corridor. We can go into discussion. Or questions. We'll start with Dade.
Mariah, thank you. I think it's very well done as always. I think, I don't know that this needs to be added there, but I think the survey of the corridor, the issue today, the issues observed at the development east of the Rivanna make me think it might be useful. This is probably something outside of our purview, but in terms of recommendations, just to establish zones where the landscape character should be preserved in some way. Necessarily in the development areas around the city, it's eroding in terms of the amount of tree cover, but it's just in terms of protecting the long-term rural character of the entrance to the county. I don't know if there's anything we can do in terms of recommending additional buffer area or other things for the highway that helps preserve that character and emphasize the natural views that are highlighted here.
Thanks, Dade. Frank?
Thanks, Margaret. I would agree with Dade. I think it's well done. I think the characteristics to avoid are appropriate. I don't know, yeah, to your point, Data, I don't know how we would document requirements for additional screening and what could be in the case of Rivanna, it's kind of a distant, it's not on the right of way. I think the character in the urban area is a little bit different. But I don't know that it's different enough to justify creating a separate zone. I don't think the requirements really, or things we're looking at probably aren't really any different. So, yeah, good job.
Thanks. Tara?
Yeah, Mariah, thanks for putting this together. Yeah, I think I appreciate the work been done on this. I don't have a fully formed thought yet, so
Thank you.
good.
Just had a couple questions. For this includes on and off ramps, correct?
That's a really good point. The corridor overlay does include the on and off ramps, and we didn't think about that. We'll
I mean,
go
in
back
some
and-
cases, those can be long stretches. Just a thought. And then just the Wegmans image prompted another question. Are there restrictions on limbing up a wooded buffer? Like if you go in there and limb everything up to like the eave or a certain height, is that allowed?
My understanding is that that's, unless there's a note on the plan that says that's allowed, then that's not the intent.
Because I think, if it's a, all deciduous forest, you can see through a pretty wide buffer, but just a thought. I think that's what happened here. I think that's a pretty generous buffer, I think.
We were just talking about that just this morning. It might be worth a discussion, just a general work session about how to treat visibility and when a large part of the buffer is in the right of way. And, there's just, when you draw a big tree line on the plan,
Mhm.
you just immediately look at it and like, that's dense.
That's
but-
significant, yeah.
But not necessarily. And particularly, if a portion of that comes out, even if it's the portion that's further away, I think we're just learning that it really opens up the view, even though there's a lot of trees left. And
Mhm.
so we might want to think about how, how much, what the word is, how much emphasis to put on, what's remaining in the buffer, and just keep more of a focus on the fact that you really can see through it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the example on 29 north of Polo Grounds, as much as I know in my mind's eye, I thought that was going to be an intense buffer. There are zones where it's not. I think that's 100 feet.
It is, and there might still be some planting left to do in there, and
Yeah.
driving by recently, it looked like maybe a lot of trees may have come down in a storm. So
Right.
also has an impact.
I guess I'd ask the question, do we really care about the on and off ramps? I think the experience is on the corridor. Off ramps to and from the corridor.
That may be, I think maybe we should just take a specific look with that question in mind, and then make a decision.
And I think there are probably many instances where those off ramps are then connecting to another arterial that is also an entrance corridor. So for continuity, it may be worth.
That's a
looking
good
at that.
point. It might not matter, yeah, from that scene.
There might be something to think about when you think about what is your first experience coming into a place? Where should that point lie? If it's on the off ramp, just off of the off ramp, when you turn, there are many moments. So it might be different depending on the ramp. One thing too, I would also be interested in is sometimes along long stretches of interstates and roadways, it can become monotonous and boring, and sometimes entrances happen just by virtue of seeing something and being introduced to a city, and that kind of helps break up the pace of an interstate and introduce you to a city. So in some instances, is it okay to see, right, what belongs in a city? And a more urban form, is that actually communicating some sense of arrival and character to Charlottesville? At what point is that appropriate, where visibility is okay?
Great point. Any other?
That's a really good point.
Mhm. I agree.
Yeah, I drove to Richmond this weekend and it's pretty boring for a long stretch of that drive to Richmond. So it's good food for thought.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, much of the, Neil Williamson with the Free Enterprise Forum, 2 points. Much of this discussion over the past few months has been talking about the experience. And when you're talking about the I-64 corridor, nothing in here speaks of the fact that you're driving 70 miles an hour. And I think that it would be important to put that into the context of the experience. Also, the idea of characteristics to avoid obstructed mountain views, that's a big statement. And the mountain views are distant, and there's a lot of property between I-64 and the mountains. Very little bit that ARB has control over. So I think, you know, you want to be balancing that in this document that's supposed to be helpful to applicants. I would encourage you to recognize the speed, the very much the idea of the buffer that is provided by VDOT, as well as, which is mentioned in here, but I don't know that it's mentioned as a VDOT right of way. It is definitely mentioned as wooded buffers, and whether or not you consider those to be part of the buffer that you would consider for something that's adjacent to 64, as we saw with the Wegmans Shopping Center. So I apologize for stepping out ahead of time, but since the discussion was, I thought it was appropriate that especially that 70-mile-an-hour experience is very different than the experience on Polo Grounds Road, unless, you know, you're late for a soccer game.
Thank you. No, that's a great point. It makes me think too of maybe the level of importance that the long view, the distant view, is more important, and how that is affected by speed and by topography versus if it's a relatively flat portion of 64 and it's pretty wooded, you'd have to do this real quick as you're driving to notice it. I guess we're only thinking about the driver. There are passengers that are doing this the whole time, but no, those are good considerations.
I think to Mariah's point too, you have an expectation as you enter an urban area that you're gonna see buildings. Not that it's gonna be all trees. Because quite honestly, when it's all trees and you need to get off to get gas or whatever, I don't get off because I assume it's too far away and I'm not, you know. So I think you raise a really good point that I don't think we should obstruct all views from the corridor. Figuring out which ones to obstruct and which ones not to obstruct, I guess, is the challenge, but.
Great point. Any other discussion, comments, questions?
Well, I guess I appreciate Margaret's suggestion of a work session and would support that as well. I guess one question for Margaret as well is, I know we've talked about making some recommendations to update the guidelines and also maybe exploring scenic highway designation for some spaces to provide a little more visual control than is currently provided by the guidelines. What next steps, what would be the process, and when could we begin that? Because I do feel like we've started before, at least I feel like it's become clear to me that I'd like to find some way to establish maybe some greater landscape requirements to preserve rural character in some areas where it's eroding. And I would just be interested in what we would need to do and what steps we.
Sure,
would take.
I'm wanting that exact topic to be, to continue to discuss that through the comp plan update.
And that goes through 24, is that right? So that's when that would be adopted in overall sort of regulation.
Right, so that's got a ways to go. So as we continue to work through our guidelines addenda and maybe, have more specific direction, we can continue to feed that information into the comp plan process.
So would the process be then that we have work sessions here and report out recommendations that then are relayed to the comp plan team and how do we do it so it's
Right.
appropriately?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't have the comp plan schedule in front of me, but I can share that with you all again. And as the objectives and strategies are further developed, we will be coming back to you with that. But let me get with the planners who are leading that effort and get an updated schedule, and we'll get that to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Thank you, Mariah. Other business. We have a motion to adopt the March 20th, 2023 ARB minutes.
Also move.
Second,
Second.
call the vote.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Matsuno,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye,
and Mr. Hennessy is absent.
thank you. Other items, any board members or staff that have any other items that weren't on the agenda? Hearing none. Next meeting, the next ARB meeting is scheduled for May 1st, 2023. Right now, we have no regular review items for that agenda.
Correct.
Still the case, okay. Question, does the ARB want to meet on the 1st or wait until the 15th?
Our recommendation is that you wait until the 15th.
I would support that.
Who's okay with me?
I think we're in agreement, Frank. I think all of us agree. By our agreement, we can, saying we can attend. All right, the meeting is adjourned until the next meeting on May 15th. Time is 1:49. I don't have a gavel.